If you are a music producer and you are struggling to get a great drum sound, then you should apply some of the techniques that I will show you in this video. It will take your drum sound from this to this. Hi, I'm Stefan from Mix66 and in this video I want to talk about some alternative techniques to record your drums. Drums are the most difficult instrument to record. Maybe it is because there are so many different instruments within a single drum set. We have kick, snare, toms and cymbals and often also percussions. So what happens if you record each of the single instruments of a drum set separately? Just think about it. There are few bands left that are still recording all together live in a studio. Normally you would overlap your recordings, so you would record every single instrument one at a time. So you would record drums, then bass, then guitars, then synths or whatsoever, and then your vocals. And you could do the same for your drums. You could record the kick drum, the snare drum, the toms and the cymbals separately. This can be a great solution, especially if your drummer isn't the best or if your room doesn't sound too great. This applies somewhat in my situation, or if the equipment of the drummer is less than ideal. This applies totally to my situation today because I'm using a 16-inch kick drum to record rock or metal songs. If you are recording each single instrument of the drum separately, you will have much more flexibility when it comes to processing. And finally, you will have a much better drum sound and your whole record will benefit from this. So let's see how it is done. So here are the tracks of the traditional recording, so the whole drum set at once. I have already edited the recording, so it is on the grid and in time. And if you have a listen, it sounds like a normal drum recording. I did some minimal processing. The problems with traditional drum recordings and less than ideal drummers are two. Number one, you could have flamps. For example, here you can see that the kick starts before the snare. It is exactly 3 milliseconds late, the snare. So you cannot edit both to be perfectly on the grid. You have to make a compromise, because if you move only the snare head, then it is out of phase of the overheads. So you cannot do this. And the second problem with this traditional approach of recording drums are the overhead and the rooms, that normally you have a lot of cymbals in it and you don't want as much cymbals in your room, for example. Let's listen to the room. If you would like to have more pop on the snare, you would have to use a compressor. But if you use a compressor on the room track, then also the cymbals get louder and also washier. So compressor is not the best thing to do. And of course, also in the snare microphone, you have a lot of kick drum. And in the kick drum, you have the snare. So the first approach to solve the problem of the editing, so if you have a subpar drummer who is not able to hit the shells at the very same time, so you have flamps and you want to get rid of that. The first approach to solve that is to record hand and feet separately. So first you will record only the hands and then only the feet. Or alternatively, you could also record only the hands and program the feet. This is very common in metal, because in metal you have very complex kick patterns and they have to be perfectly on the grid. So if you don't want to record and then edit your feet perfectly to the grid, you could also just program them. To all the purists out there who then say, well, then it is a fake recording. I don't know if programming your kick is much different than butchering your recording during the editing process. But it is up to you and how your fans like it, so I don't want to judge anyone. So I recorded the very same track, once with only the hands and one with only the feet. I will solo now the recording of the hands. And now the recording of the feet. Now all together I will use the image from the first recording where I'm playing all together, but you will hear the sound of the two separate recordings where I have recorded hands and feet separately. And if we take a look here at the snare hit, you can see that you are able to align kick and snare perfectly without any problems in the room or overhead mics. And now they are perfectly on top. As I said earlier, another advantage of this technique is that you could also program your kick drum. So now I will mute the kick drum recording and unmute this programmed kick drum. Here you can see the MIDI file. This technique comes also in handy if you don't want to commit to kick patterns while recording. For example, now I could change the kick pattern even though I already recorded the drums. So now you could program whatever you like. But also here with this technique we have the problem with the loud cymbals in the room mic. Even though the kick has a separate room track and a separate overhead track, the snare and the toms are still on the same track as the overheads. So the next evolutionary step of this technique, so to speak, is to record also the hands separately. I normally record the shells, so snare and toms separately, and the cymbals separately. If you are recording your drums in that way, you will have much cleaner room and overhead tracks because the cymbals and the shells are separate. Here is the recording of it. Again, we have the same kick file, a snare, and if we listen to the overhead and the room from the snare, we can hear that there are no cymbals in it. And if we listen to the cymbals, we have a track with just the cymbals on it. This technique gives us maximum flexibility when it comes to processing our drums. For example, take a look at the overhead track of the snare. I've added 15 dB high shelf at 8K and it gives us a nice crack on the snare. Without this processing, it sounds very dull, but with it, And now let's try to do this very same processing. I will copy selected effect to a track where we have recorded the whole drum set at once. Here, overhead track, I will bypass this EQ and paste the other EQ from the snare overhead track. Now the cymbals are just bright, so we don't want to do such processing on a overhead track where the whole drum set is included. Let's have a listen to the drum sound we have achieved by recording each shell individually. You can do much more extreme processing on your tracks because they are much clearer. For example, you don't have any snare hits in your kick drum. And no kick drum in your snare track. Compare this to the traditional technique. On this recording I did some very conservative moves, so I did not huge bold moves. EQing wise I could do some more, but I think you get a feeling on how different the approaches are. The last technique that I want to show you today is to record just the cymbals and program all the shells. I would say this is the last resort. If you really have a drummer that doesn't know how to play the songs properly, then this is a great solution to have organic sounding cymbals and to have great sounding shells. Listen to the final result. All I recorded was this. I hope you have learned something today. If you want to have my free drum samples, then just click the link in the description. And as always, thank you for watching. Please click the subscribe button and see you next time. Bye.